Jaylen Carter stepped forward to answer, but the professor erased the board before he could speak. The class laughed, but not out of humor, because the equation he was solving wasn't meant to be solved by him. He needs to be humbled, someone whispered. The cameras were rolling. The challenge was live, and what Jaylen said next, it silenced the entire university. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Jaylen Carter slid through the arched doorway of Hamilton Hall with quiet purpose, his steps almost soundless against the polished marble floor. Above him, the stained glass windows cast fractured light onto the ancient walls, whispering stories of long-vanished luminaries whose footsteps had once echoed here. He inhaled deeply, the scent of old paper, polished wood, and silent privilege filling his lungs, reminding him he had earned his place, but he also felt the gravity of expectations bearing down. He had walked into Calculus 3, and with every muted click of his shoes, the air seemed to thicken. At 18, Jaylen was lean, tall, with deep brown skin that glowed under the classroom lights, and eyes bright with quiet determination. Raised on Chicago's South Side, he had grown up watching his mother balance 3 jobs, lectures from his late grandmother's encouragement burning in his mind. Math is your second language, she'd told him. In his community, excellence was survival, but here excellence still had to prove itself. Wellington University's legacy hung around him like ivory chains. Founded 2 centuries ago, it had been a breeding ground for Supreme Court justices and industry moguls. Its prestige whispered, "You don't belong, unless you carried papers that said otherwise." And Jaylen did. A full scholarship framed on the mantel of their small living room. Back home, flickering in photos of family after family. Yet here it was just another name on a roster. He chose a seat halfway back, not the front where eyes would linger, but not the back where isolation breeds assumptions. He settled in, smoothing out his notebook that already brimmed with his own derivations. Sketches of proofs he'd practiced in the blackboard-sized mirror of his childhood bedroom. In that space, math didn't judge. It remained absolute. As he sat, a quiet hush rippled outward from the center of the room, where a small group of students clustered, mostly white, some polite-looking, others smug, whispering and exchanging glances. One, a wiry, pale boy with trembly enthusiasm, leaned over to a friend and let the words slip out. "He's probably just good at mental math." The phrase hung, half in jest, half in contempt. Jaylen heard it. He absently traced circles on his notebook's margins, not reacting. He had stared down discouragement before it was advanced-level training. The door banged open. Professor Wallace Baring entered with the harsh click of dress shoes, meeting hard tile. Mid-60s, cold precision in every movement, narrow wire-rimmed glasses, reflecting the classroom lights, like lenses separating the capable from the charade artists. He exuded an unspoken creed. Only the worthy remain. Students snapped into silent attention. Baring said nothing until the chalk hissed across slate. Tall and deliberate, he wrote a monstrous derivative problem, sprawling across several blackboards, a problem normally reserved for grad students, if ever seen at all. He died half a beat. Watch. In this room, his voice was clipped, measured. We don't memorize. We understand. Anyone can regurgitate formulas. That's mimicry. Parlor tricks. Mathematics is thought. Silence settled like fog. Then, abruptly he pointed. "You," he said, pointing the chalk at Jaylen, without shifting his gaze. "What's the limit of this function as x approaches 0? Jaylen registered the problem as a nuance, not unlike listening to a high-speed conversation in a language you understand well. His pulse remained calm. In his mind, variables twisted, graphs unfolded, real and imaginary values danced together. He inhaled, measured. The room held its breath. When x is negative, the numerator collapses toward negative infinity. From the right, positive infinity. The two do not converge. The limit does not exist. The words were steady. No flourish. No flourish needed. A deliberate pause. Baring studied him, narrowed his eyes, as if peering into an equation more than a student's skin. "Correct," he said once, expressionless. But it wasn't praise. It was admission. Chalk scratched on slate again. Baring turned his back, resuming the monologue on rigid proofs and continuity. But there was a whispering hum now. Not polite intrigue. Something more feral. Jaylen closed his notebook, smoothed out a crease in the paper. He heard snide whispers, like flies clicking in the silence. He's not here for diversity optics.
Probably got lucky on the SAT.
Jaylen did not flinch. He listened. Calculus would wait. In his notes he began to sketch another advance, a real solution for the red flag curve Bering had posed earlier. He followed the rhythm of lecture, but sketched in the margins, tracing his own path. Class ended in a whisper of stiffness. Students rushed like sand, some colliding into clusters, others with relief. Jaylen packed slowly. Something in his cadence stood as calm defiance. As the room emptied, he passed Bering at the center podium. Bering, wiping the board clean, poised like a judge dissecting evidence. Jaylen slowed. "Mr. Carter," Bering said, turning with slow movement. No softness in the gaze, no greeting. Jaylen stared back, respectful but unbowed. Bering lifted his hand, chalk clutched between fingers. "Let's raise the stakes next time," he murmured, voice low but firm. Then chalk tapped the tray. A deliberate beat. "We'll see if you're still confident." Jaylen froze. Chalk tremored. A single name, undeniably his, appeared beneath the words. Not on the board. In Bering's notebook, underlined. Jaylen closed the door behind him gently. The corridor wafted freedom. But behind him, Bering's eyes, half hidden behind lenses, remained, waiting. As Jaylen walked away, controlled, composed, Professor Bering closed his notebook with a soft snap. His lips curved into something dangerously like a smile. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out Jaylen's scholarship letter. The second day of Calculus 3 began with an overcast sky and a warning in the wind. Jaylen Carter walked into room 207 5 minutes early, just as he had before. He wasn't trying to prove anything. This was how he'd always done it. Prepared, focused, quiet. But today the room felt different. The glances started the moment he stepped in. Some students went silent. Others whispered without lowering their voices. Jaylen caught fragments. "Wonder if he'll get a gold star today." He probably got the answer off Reddit. They didn't know him, but they had already decided who he was. He sat in the same spot. Second row. Middle. Not too close. Not too far. The whispers continued. Some weren't even whispers anymore. Is he really that smart? Or just good at showing off? Jaylen ignored it. He had long since mastered the art of appearing unbothered, even when everything inside him twisted. He opened his notebook and wrote one word at the top of a clean page. Precision. The clock ticked. Then, right on time, Professor Wallace Bering entered with his usual air of quiet calculation, closing the door behind him, like a judge sealing a courtroom. He didn't greet the class. Didn't glance at his notes. Instead, he walked directly to the board, and without a word began to write, and write, and write. The equation sprawled across 3 full panels. Symbols stacked upon symbols, loops and integrals, that danced between branches of abstract topology and mathematical philosophy. It wasn't just complex, it was legendary. It had no formal solution. Einstein himself had once dismissed a variation of it, as unsolvable without rethinking space. The class shifted uncomfortably. One student whispered, "That's not on the syllabus, right?" No answer. Bering capped the marker, then stepped back from the board. His voice was low, even, deliberate. "Just a fun challenge," he said. "A little warm-up. No need to solve it perfectly. Just show me the path." Several hands shot up, mostly the usual suspects, the front-row formula reciters and math club veterans. Bering scanned the room, then pointed. "Mr. Carter." The room stilled. Jaylen froze mid-sentence in his notebook. "Would you come to the board, please?" Jaylen blinked slowly. A pause passed. Then he closed his notebook, stood and approached. "I just want to clarify," he said respectfully. "Is this part of our course material? This seems like it." Bering cut him off sharply. "Are you backing down?" The tone was surgical. Jaylen looked at the board, then back at the professor. "No, sir," he replied evenly. He picked up the marker. Behind him, the whispers began again. This time, not quiet. "Let's see how far he gets. This should be good." Phones were pulled out, not discreetly. Jaylen saw one in the corner of his eye, angled right at him. A classmate snickered and typed, "Let's see him solve this day," before tapping post. Jaylen gripped the marker and stared at the problem. The room around him fell into a slow, anxious silence. This wasn't about math. This wasn't about curiosity or learning. This was a trap. He could feel it in his bones. He began to write. Not the full solution, but an outline of first principles. He needed time to think. The symbols felt like landmines, each one waiting to prove him a fraud. But he didn't freeze. He sketched a first derivative. Not because it would help, but because it bought him 30 seconds. In the back, someone snorted. Another chuckled. Baring leaned against his desk, arms folded, silent, unmoved. Jaylen's throat tightened, not with fear, but recognition. This was the kind of moment that wasn't supposed to happen anymore. Not here, not now, but it was happening. His intelligence being made spectacle, his presence being put on trial. The math became background noise. The real equation was social. Prove you're not a fluke. Solve what Einstein couldn't. Do it under pressure. Do it while being laughed at. Jaylen put the marker down. He turned slowly, scanning the room. Their faces were everything he expected. Mocking, dismissive, entertained. Only one face didn't look like the others. A girl in the back, Asian, quiet notebook on her lap. Wasn't laughing. She wasn't smiling. She just watched. Jaylen nodded once, then looked at Baring. I'll have your answer next class. His voice was calm. No anger, no performance. Then he picked up his notebook, walked to his seat, and packed his things. Every motion deliberate, controlled, silent. He walked toward the door. No one stopped him. He opened it, and as he exited, someone whispered, "Guess he folded after all." Jaylen's face never changed, but his eyes said everything. This wasn't over. Not even close. Back in his dorm, Jaylen sat at his desk under the flickering light and stared at the same equation. Then he began to write, not just notes but a completely new approach no one had ever tried. And on the corner of the page he wrote one word, proof. The clock read 2:47 a.m. Jaylen Carter sat hunched in the furthest corner of Wellington University's library, his hand moving across the paper with the discipline of someone used to proving himself in silence. The light above his table flickered every now and then, giving his shadow a twitchy, nervous life on the wall behind him. His back ached. His coffee was cold, but his mind wouldn't let go. He stared at the same equation Professor Baring had challenged him with 2 days earlier. The fun problem. Unsolved. Unwritten. Unfair. Jaylen had spent nearly 20 straight hours wrestling with it, not because he expected to solve what even theoretical mathematicians had abandoned, but because he knew it was never about the answer. It was about making him sweat, fail, fold, prove them right. And he wouldn't. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of pages, and the low hum of the custodial crew, buffing floors, somewhere in the distance. Jaylen reached for his pen, paused, then drew a strange shape, something between a Mobius strip and a collapsing sphere. It didn't make sense, yet, but it didn't have to. Not yet. As he sat back to think, movement caught his eye. A janitor, tall, broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard and skin the color of deep oak, pushed a mop bucket slowly down the aisle between bookcases. His name tag read Freeman. No last name, just Freeman. Jaylen nodded respectfully. The janitor returned it, pausing nearby. He leaned on the mop and squinted at the whiteboard Jaylen had pulled up beside his table. "You look like you're solving the secrets of the universe, son," Freeman said, voice gravelly but warm. Jaylen gave a tired smile. "Feels like it." Freeman looked at the math for a long time. Then he said, without moving, "You know, you ain't the first young brother I've seen in here this late, working harder than the rest, getting less credit for it." Jaylen didn't reply. Freeman didn't expect him to. "You know what happens to most of them?" Freeman continued. "They burn out. Or worse, they start believing what the walls whisper." Jaylen leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And what do the walls whisper?" Freeman's expression darkened. "That you're a guest in a house that was never built for you." Jaylen stared down at his notebook. A line he had drawn earlier suddenly looked wrong. He scratched it out. Freeman began mopping again. But before he turned the corner he said over his shoulder, "Don't try to impress them. You're not here to perform. You're here to outlast them." Jaylen sat in silence. Those words hit like a slap across the face, and a hug from behind, all at once. The next morning, as campus buzzed with sleepy students and early lectures, Jaylen was already on his second cup of coffee and fourth variation of the problem. The solution still didn't fit, but his method was starting to show shape. He had shifted the dimensions, folded the space differently, applied pressure in places no one else had thought to. He wasn't solving it like Baring wanted him to. He was solving it like Jaylen Carter would. And maybe, just maybe, that was the problem. As he walked to class later that day, backpack slung across one shoulder, Jaylen began noticing things he hadn't registered before, maybe because he hadn't wanted to. A black sophomore he'd met during orientation. Shauna was now seated at a different table in the dining hall, alone. The week before, she had been surrounded by a group of engineering students. Jaylen gave her a small wave. She smiled weakly but said nothing. Later in the STEM building hallway, Jaylen passed a wall-mounted board filled with student group flyers and announcements. One caught his eye, handwritten in black marker on white paper. Looking for a study group? Not if you're dead weight. Know your limits. Beneath it, someone had scrawled, "Or your place." Jaylen stood still. A student walked by and saw him staring. "Oh," the guy said almost nervously. "That's been there a while. No big deal." Jaylen raised an eyebrow. "You think it's funny?" The guy shrugged, then walked off. That evening, Jaylen sat in the back row of the dorm's common room, pretending to read while quietly observing the space. White students moved freely, laughing, lounging, discussing assignments. But every black student there sat either alone or in hushed pairs, quiet, reserved, watching their tone. It was subtle. It was everywhere. You weren't told to leave. You were made to feel like you shouldn't have come. By midnight, Jaylen was back in his room, seated on the edge of his bed, surrounded by papers, diagrams, and reference books. He rubbed his temples, trying to fight off the sense of vertigo that came from being both seen too much and not seen at all. Then came the sound, a soft rustle under the door. Jaylen froze. He walked over, bent down, and picked up a piece of folded paper. It wasn't thick enough to be a flyer. It wasn't typed. Inside, in jagged handwriting, "Know your place." No name. No explanation. Just those 3 words. Jaylen stared at it for a long moment. Then he walked across the room, pulled a roll of tape from his desk drawer, and pressed the note against the wall above his desk, right next to his chalkboard. He looked at it like it was part of the equation. Then he said aloud, quietly, "Note it." He turned back to his work, more focused than before. Because now it wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about surviving one. Hours later, as the sky began to bleed orange and pink behind his blinds, Jaylen leaned back in his chair. His notebook pages were filled with chaotic scribbles, crossouts, notes, arrows, even a coffee stain. But in the middle of page 7, something clicked. He'd found a loophole. Not a full solution, but a route. A pathway no one had mapped before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Real, mathematical progress. He could hear his grandmother's voice in his head. "When you can't find the door, baby, make a window." Jaylen grabbed his bag, stuffed the notebook inside, and walked out the door. This time, when he walked through the campus quad, students turned to look. Not in curiosity, but with expectation. They were waiting for him to stumble, to fold, to break. Jaylen kept walking, unshaken, unfolded, unbroken. As he entered the lecture hall, ready to present his solution, Jaylen noticed something taped to the whiteboard. A photocopy of his high school GPA report, circled in red, and underneath it, one word scribbled, "Lucky." Jaylen Carter paused at the door of room 27, inhaling a quiet breath that tasted of chalk dust and anticipation. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, like the moments before something breaks or blooms. Inside, the classroom lights flickered, casting long shadows across the rows of desks. He reached the threshold and stepped in, locking eyes with a knot of students whose stares lingered longer than kindness. He carried something intangible with him. As he walked to the board, a burden of expectation, yes, but heavier. The knowledge that every curious gaze concealed a challenge waiting to be turned into a trap. Jaylen held his notebook against his chest, a lifeline of scribbled proofs and half-formed ideas. He set it down on the lectern and raised his gaze to the class. Professor Wallace Baring sat behind his desk, arms folded, expression still as marble. Their eyes met. Jaylen settled behind the lectern, exhaling. "Before I begin," he said, voice steady despite the tremor he cunningly masked, "I want to say this isn't a final answer. It's not polished, but it's the opening of a path, a new path." A few students smirked. One leaned forward, whispering theatrically, "Let's see the path, genius." But Jaylen didn't flinch. He uncapped a piece of fresh chalk, feeling its powdery resistance against skin. He began by outlining the standard, run-of-the-mill method everyone expected, derivative-based, conventional, textbook. The board filled with symbols they'd all seen. Integrals, limits, continuity charts. It was sameness in tangible form. That was deliberate, because when the board was full of the expected, what followed would burst through. Once he'd sketched the familiar approach, he paused and drew a deep breath, then pivoted. He erased a few lines quickly, then advanced into something different. His chalk traced a swirl of topology, vector fields bending into loops, space folded onto itself like geological layers of thought. A non-standard inversion glowed in chalk white against the black, lines curved where angles should have been. Silence stretched. Bodies leaned forward. Lips parted mid-whisper. Pens hovered. From the back, someone snorted and typed. Jaylen heard the ping of a phone sending. Watch this math magic. He pressed forward, faster now, but deliberate. Each stroke had intent. He layered step on step, drawing a curve that circled an invisible point. Unexpected, clever, subtle. 15 minutes passed. Jaylen stepped back. This isn't perfect, he repeated. But it showcases a direction, one through the wall, a direction Bering never asked us to look for. There was silence. Then a single laugh, cold and mocking, ripped through the hush. Liam, the front row showman, chuckled. Okay, cool story, he drawled, incredulity infecting half the room. The laughter passed through rows, gathering strength. Jaylen's heart beat in slow, fatal resonance. But then, a voice cut through. A quiet one. One he didn't expect. Emily King, the PhD teaching assistant known for navigating theories more than classrooms, rose from her seat. She studied the diagram Jaylen had drawn. Then she said, measured, "Could you go back to the inversion point, before you rotated the axis?" Jaylen blinked, nodded. Emily took a step up and traced lines in the air, not touching chalk, but following Jaylen's outlined logic. "This isn't in our curriculum," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But it's consistent. It's sound." Heads whipped around. Even Bering's posture shifted. Subtly, but enough. Emily turned to the professor. "Have you seen this method before?" Bering's jaw tightened, and maybe that was the only sign he was rattled. "No," he replied, voice flat and brittle. Emily looked from the board to Jaylen. "It's not standard, but it's innovative." A heavy pause. Another student in the back raised a hand tentatively. Then another. Then, as if triggered, murmurs swelled into applause. Not full-throated, but careful, spreading like light through a gap. Claps, quiet, resonant. Jaylen returned to his seat. His body trembled, not from fear but relief. Simple, real relief. Bering didn't move. He didn't speak. Finally his voice broke the tension. Class dismissed. Jaylen gathered his notebooks and left, securing his jacket tighter around himself like armor. Outside the classroom, autumn light spilled through the tall windows, casting crunchy patterns across the floor. Jaylen stepped into a corridor that felt alive now, electric. Every whisper carried curiosity, but also glimmers of respect. A few students looked at him differently. He crossed the quad slowly. The crisp air smelled of uprooted maps and possibility. As he neared his dorm building, he let himself believe just for a moment that today had changed things. He put a hand to the door. That's when he saw it. His door defaced. Words spray-painted in jagged, hateful red. "Ingenious?" 3 horrifying seconds, then obvious fear. His bag fell to the ground. The echo of his book hitting tiles swallowed the moment. No footsteps, no voices, just that scarlet insult, screaming silence down the hallway. His fingers curled into fists, not to fight, but just to feel something solid. A door creaked behind him. He turned to see a girl watching, eyes wide, shocked. He met her gaze. Then she closed her door. Too fast. Then, silence again. Inside his room, he stared at the vandalized door through the peephole, dark accusatory letters bleeding onto wood. He walked to his desk. Sat. Minutes passed. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. Buzzed again. He picked it up. "Stay in your lane. Or next time we don't use paint." No punctuation talk. Empty threat. He stared at the message. Cold sweat trickling down. The window looked out onto a campus drenched in fall colors. Peaceful, beautiful. But on his door, hate carved the truth. He stared at his reflection in the window. Then at his chalk-stained hands. Then back at the door. A storm began inside him. One he would channel into more than just math. Jaylen's phone buzzed again. This time, a picture. The chalkboard in room 207. That curve he'd drawn. But someone had circled it. Red ink. Beneath it, prove it at the front steps. Midnight. The morning after the vandalism. Jaylen Carter stood outside the Dean of Student Affairs' office, with a printed photo of his defaced dorm door. The red slur, thick and jagged, glared back at him from the page. He had printed it in color. He wanted them to see exactly how loud it had screamed. Inside, the administrative assistant smiled, as if processing a misplaced textbook request.
"Someone will be with you shortly," she said without making eye contact.
Jaylen sat in the corner chair, clutching the photo. His hoodie was pulled tight around his face, more to protect himself from the stares than from the cold. The waiting room was sterile and quiet, but outside, in the student commons, the whispers had begun to swell. He finally met with Dean Carver, a man who wore fairness like a suit he forgot to tailor.
"I'm very sorry this happened to you," Carver said, folding his hands across his desk. "Truly, we take these incidents seriously."
Jaylen said nothing. He slid the photo across the desk. Carver frowned. "Did you see anyone? Or hear anything unusual?" "No," Jaylen replied. "But there are security cameras on the hallway ceiling, just outside my door." The dean nodded. Slowly. Too slowly. "Well," he began, "I spoke to campus security. Unfortunately, the footage from that night wasn't recorded. There was a system glitch." Jaylen stared at him. "A glitch?" "Yes, unfortunate timing." Jaylen leaned back in his chair. "So nothing will happen." "We're continuing to investigate," Carver said, tone bureaucratic. "But unless someone comes forward, there's not much we can do." Jaylen didn't move. "If it were one of them, you'd already have a suspect." Carver's mouth twitched. "Now let's not make this about race?" Jaylen cut in. "I didn't say that. You did." The room went cold. Carver didn't respond. Jaylen stood. "Don't worry. I'll keep investigating for you." He left without waiting for permission. That afternoon, someone slipped a folded flyer under his dorm door. Not a threat this time. A printed post. It read, "This happened to me too. They told me it was a prank." Below it, "Anonymous student." Jaylen checked the email domain. A burner. He opened his laptop. The student forum page was filled with anonymous confessions. Not all about race, but all about being ignored. "My roommate made a noose out of charging cables and hung it on my door. Nothing happened. I was told by a professor I speak too aggressively when I asked a question."
They lost my internship paperwork 3 times.
Each post was time-stamped. All recent. Jaylen scrolled through them in silence, his eyes burning from more than exhaustion. Some stories were racial. Others were classist, sexist, or just cruel. But a pattern emerged. No one was held accountable. Victims disappeared. Systems stayed whole. The following day, Jaylen attended Calculus 3 like nothing had happened. Baring didn't acknowledge him, didn't mention the equation, the board, the applause. It was as if none of it existed. And neither did the paint. But he noticed the silence. It wasn't neutral. It was weaponized. Students whispered when he passed. Others avoided his gaze altogether. Faculty looked through him. Only one didn't. Dr. Lainey Moore. She was young for a lecturer. Mixed race. Tenure track but not tenured. She taught Introduction to Discrete Mathematics down the hall. She caught up to him outside the cafeteria one day. "I read your notes," she said. "The inversion technique? It's brilliant." Jaylen was taken aback. "Thanks," he said, cautious. Lainey lowered her voice. "Off the record, Barron's threatened faculty before, quietly. Anyone who questions his rigor policy gets sidelined." Jaylen frowned. "So they just let it happen?" Lainey's eyes were sad. "They don't let it. They survive it." Jaylen didn't say anything. She handed him a folded piece of paper. "This is the number of someone at the Math Diversity Coalition. She's faculty. Retired but sharp. You might want to talk to her." Jaylen accepted the paper. Their hands touched briefly, shared understanding. Then she walked off quickly, like someone afraid of being seen. Jaylen's inbox pinged later that week with a subject line. Story inquiry. The vandalism. It was from the student-run campus news site. A reporter named Carla had heard about the incident and wanted to interview him. Jaylen agreed. They met at a campus coffee shop. Carla, a senior with intense eyes and a worn notebook, asked smart layered questions. "Why do you think they targeted you?" "Because I didn't shrink." "Do you think it was racially motivated?" Jaylen looked her in the eye. "I know it was." Carla nodded, scribbled. He left feeling lighter. Maybe something would come from this. 2 days later, the story was pulled. Quietly, Jaylen emailed her. No reply. He checked the website. No mention of him. No story. Just a generic update about campus safety improvements. The silence was louder than ever. That night, Jaylen sat on his bed, laptop open, notes scattered across his desk, unfinished proofs bleeding into spiral-bound chaos. He didn't know what to do next.
That's when the email came.
No subject.
No sender name.
Just one line. Leave, or we'll raise the difficulty again. Jaylen looked up from the screen and realized someone had slid another note under his door. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten. In the corner, a single calculus symbol he had invented, circled in red ink. Flyers for the campus event had gone up overnight. Open forum, maintaining rigor in a diverse classroom. Hosted by the Department of Mathematics. Speaker Professor Wallace Baring. Panelist, Dr. Regina Carr. Education Policy. Panelist, Jaylen Carter. Undergraduate Mathematics Fellow. Jaylen hadn't agreed to be a panelist. He'd been invited formally through an email that read more like an honor than a trap. We value your unique insight as a student navigating advanced mathematics, it said. Your voice would be appreciated in an honest, constructive conversation. Jaylen had hesitated at first, but something in him wanted to believe. Maybe this was a chance to finally speak on his terms, to put a voice to the silence that had followed him from dorm door defacement to anonymous threats. So he said yes. He arrived 10 minutes early to a lecture hall already half full. Faculty lined the walls, some leaning against the back like polite spectators. Students filled the seats in uneven clusters. Most of them were white. A few black students stood near the exit, arms folded, eyes cautious. Jaylen scanned the stage. No name placards, no chairs arranged for equal speaking time, just one lectern. And behind it, Professor Wallace Baring, flipping through a folder of notes. Jaylen stepped onto the stage quietly. There was no one else behind the curtain. No fellow students. No microphones for open dialogue. He looked out at the crowd, then back at Baring. Something was wrong, but it was too late to walk away. Baring took the stage precisely at noon. Thank you all for coming, he began, voice steady and crisp. Today's forum is about something larger than any one student or classroom. It's about the integrity of higher education, of what it means to earn excellence. Jaylen's name was never mentioned. Not at first. Baring paced slowly across the stage, pausing just long enough to measure every word. In recent years, he continued, there's been a troubling trend, a shift toward performative proficiency. Students who believe confidence is a substitute for preparation. Jaylen froze. Baring continued, especially in elite institutions like ours, we must remain vigilant against the erosion of standards under the guise of diversity. Murmurs rippled. Jaylen's chest tightened. He stepped forward. With respect, is this still a panel? Because it sounds more like a lecture. The moderator, an assistant dean, intervened. You'll have time to respond shortly, Jaylen. Shortly. The word felt like a leash. Baring moved to the next slide in his presentation, an anonymized version of Jaylen's equation from Calculus 3. It was the same method he'd used weeks earlier. He pointed to it. This was submitted as a proposed solution to a long-standing unsolved problem, Baring said. It was creative, but flawed, and the enthusiasm it received, clapping, cheering, reveals how eager we've become to celebrate incomplete thinking. Gasps. Laughter. Some nods. Jaylen stepped up to the mic. I submitted that approach, he said evenly, and I never claimed it was a full solution. I said it was a direction, because in real math, that's where discovery starts. The room went quiet. Jaylen took a breath, voice steady. You didn't criticize the math. You erased the context. You turned a classroom challenge into a warning shot. The moderator shifted nervously. Let's keep the conversation respectful. Jaylen didn't stop. The problem isn't students being unprepared. It's systems that were never designed to prepare us. I didn't come here to lower the bar. I came here to prove it doesn't measure everyone equally. Scattered clapping. One student stood briefly. Another muttered, here we go again. Baring smiled thinly. Jaylen leaned into the mic one last time. You don't want diversity, he said. You want compliance that comes with a different skin tone. That was the line that split the room. Half the audience stared. The other half clapped slowly. The moderator stepped in. We're moving on, she said quickly, cutting the mic. Thank you, Jaylen. Jaylen stepped back. His mic was off. But his words were not forgotten. That evening, As he returned to his dorm, Jaylen found a manila envelope taped to his door. No return address. Inside was a single typed letter. To Mr. Jaylen Carter. As part of routine academic auditing, your scholarship is now under review. This does not indicate wrongdoing. Further information will follow. Office of Financial Aid. His legs gave slightly beneath him. Scholarship. Everything depended on that. Housing. Tuition. Future. He stood in the hallway, hands trembling slightly, the echo of applause still ringing in his ears from earlier. Only now it sounded like something else. A warning shot. Jaylen opened his laptop to look for clarification and found a new message in his inbox. No subject. No sender. One sentence. It's not just math we're testing. The first thing Jaylen noticed was the blank space. He had logged into the university's online course portal late that night, searching for his latest grade in Calculus 3. Not out of eagerness, just instinct. He'd grown used to double-checking everything. Every submission, every timestamp, every grade. But when he scrolled to the assignment titled Tabapi Proof Challenge, something cold pressed against his spine. The assignment was still listed, but next to his name, incomplete. Jaylen blinked. That wasn't possible. He had submitted it, uploaded the scanned pages, even received the system confirmation. And more than that, he had presented it, in front of the entire class. Emily Kang, the TA, had asked follow-up questions. There had been applause, eyewitness, and yet, here it was. Like none of it had ever happened. He clicked the submission portal again.
No files.
No timestamp. No record. Jaylen leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. At first he told himself it had to be a glitch. Maybe the system was down. Maybe it was just a bug. But deep down a different voice whispered, "It's not a mistake. It's a message." He emailed the TA. Waited. Nothing. He tried re-uploading the work. The portal accepted it. The next morning, it was gone again. He scheduled an appointment with his academic advisor, Dr. Lyle, an older man with graying temples and a voice like oatmeal, soothing, but heavy. Jaylen explained everything methodically, calmly, evidence in hand. Dr. Lyle skimmed his notebook pages and sipped from his mug. "Well," he said slowly, "have you considered the possibility that maybe you thought you submitted it but didn't actually hit confirm?" Jaylen's eyes narrowed. "Sir, with respect, no. I checked twice, and I got the confirmation email. It was there, until yesterday." Dr. Lyle folded his hands, expression unchanged. "Memory is tricky," he said, "especially when we're under stress." Jaylen sat straighter in his chair. "Are you suggesting I imagined the entire thing, including presenting it in front of the class?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Dr. Lyle replied. "But in these situations, clarity is key. Try not to frame this as anything intentional." Jaylen's heart thudded. "It is intentional," he said quietly. "You're erasing my work." Dr. Lyle gave a tight administrative smile. "Let's not escalate. We'll investigate. But in the meantime, I suggest focusing on the next assignment." Jaylen stood slowly, collecting his notebook. "Right," he said. "Focus on proving myself all over again." As he turned to leave, Dr. Lyle called after him. "And Jaylen, don't turn this into something it's not." Back in the dining hall that afternoon, Jaylen sat alone, pushing food around on his plate, mind racing. Across the room, clusters of students laughed over lattes and pizza, mid-semester stress held at bay by shared playlists and privilege. Then someone sat down across from him. A girl. Petite, glasses, hair tied back in a neat bun. She looked nervous even as she unpacked her lunch. "I'm not trying to get involved," she said softly. "But I saw your proof." Jaylen looked up. "You were in the class?" She nodded. "I'm Min. I sit near the back." He nodded slowly. "Okay." Min leaned in, eyes darting. "My cousin was here last year. She was also in Baring's class. Got top marks. Worked harder than anyone I know. She submitted an extra credit assignment that challenged one of his methods." Jaylen tilted his head. They said she plagiarized it." She didn't. But the file disappeared from the system, and when she asked about it, they said maybe she'd dreamed it up. Said her mental health seemed unstable. Jaylen's blood chilled. "She transferred to NYU, Min added, after they took away her scholarship." Jaylen sat back, jaw tight. Min unwrapped her sandwich, hands shaking slightly. "I just thought you should know. You're not the first." Jaylen nodded once, jaw clenched. "I won't be the last either." Min's voice lowered to a whisper. They don't erase your work because it's wrong. They erase it when it scares them. Back in his dorm room that evening, Jaylen re-uploaded the entire proof again, this time using a separate Google Drive link, emailed to himself, time-stamped, backed up, printed, and for the first time he wrote a version of it, by hand on a physical whiteboard in his room. Let them try to scrub that, he muttered. But he couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway sounded like footsteps. Every buzz of his phone felt like a warning. Then at 2:17 a.m., came the knock. Not a pounding, not aggressive, just a single, polite knock. Jaylen froze, got up, looked through the peephole. No one there. He opened the door. A plain envelope sat on the floor. University seal stamped on the back. He picked it up, hands trembling. Inside, one letter. No greeting, no explanation. Just an official notice. Cease and desist. You are hereby instructed to stop publicly sharing unapproved instructional material related to the mathematics department coursework, including unsanctioned methods and interpretations not reviewed by the faculty curriculum committee. Violation may result in disciplinary action. Jaylen stared at the paper. It didn't say plagiarism. It didn't say false. It said unapproved. Not wrong. Unwelcome. Jaylen turned the envelope over and noticed a handwritten note. Different pen. Different ink. 4 words. You were never invited. Jaylen sat on the edge of his dorm bed, staring at the cease and desist letter like it was printed in another language. His desk, usually a shrine of math and quiet discipline, now felt like evidence storage. Chalk dust still clung to the air, but the space felt smaller, tighter, like it knew he was being squeezed. His phone buzzed again. He didn't want to look. It was his sister Maya. Maya Carter, 2 missed calls. Text, Jay. Call me now. Jaylen exhaled, and finally tapped call. She answered before the first ring finished. Her voice was calm but charged, like a lawyer mid-cross-examination. You didn't think to tell me the university threatened you with legal action? Jaylen swallowed. It's nothing. They just don't want me sharing my work. You're a full-time student, she snapped. Not a rogue publisher. That letter was meant to scare you. And it's working. Jaylen didn't answer. Maya continued. I'm on a train. I'll be there in 4 hours. Don't talk to anyone until I arrive. And for God's sake, stop using the school's email. Click. Jaylen stared at the screen. No space to argue. No room to breathe. Maya Carter walked into Hamilton Hall like she owned the place. And maybe, in another world, she would have. Black blazer, dark lipstick, briefcase in hand. She was only 5 years older than Jaylen, but carried the weight of someone who'd been made to learn quickly and bleed quietly. Jaylen met her near the administration building. She gave him a quick hug, brief but real, then pulled out a printed packet of documents from her bag. First things first, she said, scanning his eyes. Tell me everything, word for word. He did. He told her about the missing grade, the disappearing file, the graffiti, the threats, the whiteboard, the cease and desist, the silence. She took it all in. When he finished, she said only, now we get to work. The next day, Maya submitted a formal notice to the university, intent to sue for racial discrimination, academic retaliation, and emotional endangerment. That was the easy part. The harder part came 3 days later. Jaylen received an anonymous envelope, slid under his door. No return address. No name. Inside, a USB drive. He looked at it like it was a trap. Maya plugged it into her laptop without hesitation, activating a VPN and local encryption. A single file appeared. Admin internal memo. She opened it. Jaylen leaned over her shoulder. The first page was stamped confidential use only. The memo, dated 3 months earlier, was from the Office of Academic Affairs. The subject line read, Students to monitor for academic irregularities. Spring term. Jaylen sat up straighter. His breath stopped. Halfway through the document, a bullet-pointed list appeared. Student ID numbers, initials, and brief notes. Carter, J. Affirmative action admit. Track academic submissions closely. Note, strong personality. Watch for attitude. Mem Davis. Borderline entry. May overreach in STEM coursework. Saz Howell. Unclear aptitude monitor behavioral patterns. A. Bello. Underperformed early. Avoid pairing with top students. All 4 names belong to black students. Jaylen's fists clenched. They're tracking us. Maya nodded grimly. Not tracking. Targeting. Jaylen's voice cracked. This is the system. Maya looked at him. This isn't just about proving your intelligence anymore, Jay. It never was. It's about exposure. Jaylen stood up, pacing the room. They weren't watching because they thought we were cheating. They were watching because they couldn't stand the idea of us being better. Maya closed the laptop. We're going to leak this. But not yet. We need corroboration. Otherwise they'll just say it's fabricated. Jaylen shook his head, still stunned. They wrote it down. They were so confident they could get away with it. They put it in writing. Maya's voice lowered. Because they usually do. 3 days passed. The air on campus grew thick with suspicion. Jaylen could feel it every time he stepped outside. Eyes on him, voices lowering when he walked by. But something else had changed too. Some students began asking him if he was okay. Others stopped looking through him. Someone slipped a note into his bag that simply read, "I saw what they did. We're not all silent." Then, a professor emailed him from a personal account. Subject line, confidential. Jaylen, I have something you need to hear. I'm not brave enough to speak up, but I can't stay silent either. It's an audio recording. Faculty meeting from earlier this month. Listen carefully. It's all in there. Attached was a compressed audio file. Math Dept meeting April. Jaylen and Maya listened together in his room. The file opened with the sound of shuffling papers, chairs moving. Then came voices, familiar ones. Then Baring. He spoke first, calm, measured. We need to be strategic in how we protect academic rigor. That includes being cautious with certain students who bring media attention or pressure without the foundational skills. Another voice chimed in. The math challenge problem, that solution should have never been allowed to circulate. It undermines our standards. A third voice. Some of these students aren't here to learn. They're here to disrupt. Jaylen paused the file. He couldn't breathe. Maya's jaw was clenched. This is it, she said. This is the blood stain they can't wipe off. Jaylen clicked play again, but the final voice on the recording sent ice through his spine. It was Dean Carver. We need to make sure Carter doesn't become a headline. Handle it quietly. Legally, if we must. Academically, if we can. Jaylen Carter sat motionless, staring at the waveform dancing on his sister's laptop screen. The voices from the faculty meeting, cold, composed, calculated, still echoed in his head like courtroom verdicts. But it wasn't until Dean Carver's voice came through, clear and controlled, that the weight of it all became real. We need to make sure Carter doesn't become a headline. Handle it quietly. Legally, if we must. Academically, if we can. Jaylen's chest rose and fell once sharply. Maya paused the recording, leaned back in her chair. That's not policy. That's strategy. They were never trying to help me, Jaylen whispered. They were trying to erase me.
Maya didn't argue.
She just nodded, then saved the file twice. One encrypted on a secure drive, the other uploaded to an offshore backup. Then, without another word, she opened a browser window. At 2:13 p.m., the audio recording hit the internet. It didn't explode at first. Maya had posted it anonymously through a student-run academic justice subreddit, linking it only with a caption. This is how elite universities talk about their black students when they think no one's listening. The thread started slow, then picked up speed. Within the hour, students began sharing it on Twitter. Jaylen didn't even have to post it himself by the time he opened the app. The hashtags had already started trending. Jaylen deserves better. Math, while black. Ivory Tower exposed. He clicked one of the links. A student from UCLA reposted it with the caption, "You ever wonder what it's like to solve the impossible equation and still be called a threat? Listen to this." Then came journalists.
Blogs.
Podcasters. Major accounts with blue checkmarks weighing in. One clip went viral. Just 7 seconds of Baring's voice. I gave him the problem to put him in his place. That line, cut raw, unedited, spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, the clip had over 2 million views. Someone set it to dramatic piano music. Another put it over a video of Jaylen walking into class, edited like a slow-motion film trailer. And with each post, more people asked the same question. How many Jaylens never made it this far? The university didn't respond at first. Then, when silence became impossible, they posted a carefully worded statement. We are aware of an unauthorized recording of a faculty meeting. We take these matters seriously and are launching an internal review. No apology. No admission. Just legal armor and soft language. Jaylen read it aloud in his dorm, scoffing. They're calling it unauthorized like I hacked the building. Maya rolled her eyes. They're not sorry they got caught. They're angry they lost control. But control was slipping fast. Alumni from across the country began speaking out. Jaylen's inbox filled with messages. Some angry, some afraid, most of them grateful. One alum from the class of, I was the only black math major that year. Bering made me feel like a fraud every day. I changed majors because of him. I wish I'd had the courage to do what you're doing. A retired professor messaged anonymously. This has been happening for decades. But now people are finally listening. The university tried again to contain it. They issued another statement, this time directly from the provost's office. We affirm our commitment to diversity, inclusion, and academic excellence. Faculty discussions can at times include difficult conversations, but we are confident in our staff's integrity. The backlash was immediate. One journalist called it the softest denial in Ivy League history. Another posted, they affirm diversity, right after trying to quietly destroy it. But the moment that truly cracked the administration's shell came on a rainy Thursday morning. The inboxes of every student and faculty member lit up at once with a campus-wide announcement. Subject statement from Professor Lorraine Hastings. Body. Effective immediately, I am resigning my tenured position at Wellington University. I can no longer remain complicit in a system that gaslights, isolates, and retaliates against students who challenge its fragility. I was present at the meeting in question. I heard the comments made about Mr. Carter, and I did nothing. That was my failure. But silence is no longer an option. Dr. Wallace Bering must be held accountable. Jaylen read the statement 3 times. Then read it again. It was the first time he'd seen a faculty member put Bering's name in writing. Not just hint, not just imply. Name. Maya leaned over his shoulder. That's the crack, she whispered. And now it spreads. Outside, students gathered on the quad. Posters rose from backpacks like flags. Rigor is not a weapon. Black excellence may solve threat. We saw the tape. Some held signs with Jaylen's name. Others held math books in silent protest. And for the first time in weeks, Jaylen felt the air shift. Not in his favor, but toward truth. That night, a private number called Jaylen's phone. When he answered, a deep voice spoke just once. I was in the room too. And I recorded more than just that meeting. Jaylen Carter didn't speak during the first national news segment that aired his name. He watched it from his dorm bed, legs pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the television bolted to the rec room wall. Maya sat beside him, arms folded, lips pressed tight as the clip rolled. The anchor spoke with solemn authority. Jaylen Carter, a black mathematics student at Wellington University, has become the face of a growing scandal, one that has shaken the foundations of elite academia. Leaked audio from a private faculty meeting revealed deliberate strategies to undermine non-traditional students, particularly those of color. The broadcast cut to B-roll footage of the protest, screenshots of the memo, slowed down audio of Bering's infamous line. I gave him the problem to put him in his place. Jaylen felt like he was watching someone else's life, but it was his name, his voice, his face, and no matter how many times he blinked, it didn't fade. By the next morning, Jaylen's name was trending in over a dozen countries. Maya's inbox was flooded with media requests. So was his. CNN, NPR, MSNBC, The New York Times. They all wanted his side of the story. He said no. Every time. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to finish the semester. To breathe. To be left alone. But silence, he learned, was also a story. And the world kept writing him into one. Maya handled the press cleverly, calmly, surgically. She framed the issue as systemic, not personal. She deflected questions about race and pain with facts and policy. She quoted from the memo. She cited the law. Still, the headlines didn't listen. The genius they tried to erase. Winghamton's whistleblower. Math meets racism. Black excellence under fire. The internet had chosen its hero. And Jaylen didn't get a say. Then came the backlash. First subtle. Then venomous. Then personal. Right-wing pundits called Jaylen another woke fraud. One conservative influencer posted a video titled, Affirmative Action Math, the truth behind the Jaylen hoax. He gestured at a printed version of Jaylen's solution and mocked its weird loops and woke math nonsense. He didn't write this, the man scoffed. Some DEI advisor probably did. The comments under the video were worse. He should be expelled. Bet he can't even pass algebra. Another diversity hire playing victim. Then came the conspiracy blogs. One ran a piece accusing Maya of forging the memo and planting the USB stick herself. Another claimed Jaylen had coordinated the protest with paid activists. A third accused him of hacking into the university system to erase his own grade, as a publicity stunt. Jaylen stopped reading after that, but the damage seeped in anyway. That week, his parents received a letter with no return address. Inside, "Keep your boy in line, or we will." Maya called the police. Nothing came of it. Then their home address was posted on a fringe forum. Their father, a quiet man who hadn't cried since their grandmother died, sat at the kitchen table with a baseball bat by the front door for 3 nights straight. Jaylen called him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. His father paused, then said, "Don't be. You're fighting what I never had the chance to." But the scariest messages came closest. Slipped under Jaylen's dorm door in the middle of the night. Folded, handwritten. One read, "You're making it worse for the rest of us. Stop talking." Another, "Enjoy your 15 minutes. You'll flunk out before the semester ends." The third just had a single word, written in red marker. "Nay." Jaylen burned that one. Maya wanted to call the campus police. Jaylen said no. He'd stopped expecting protection a long time ago. Then on a fog-drenched Tuesday morning, Jaylen received an official email. Subject, disciplinary notice. He opened it, hands already numb. "Mr. Carter, due to a recent pattern of conduct deemed disruptive to the academic environment, including an unfair distribution of internal university materials and violations of classroom decorum, you are hereby placed on temporary academic suspension, effective immediately pending review." His breath left him. Not a full expulsion, but close. Enough to halt his coursework, lock him out of systems, trigger scholarship review. Jaylen read it again. Violations of classroom decorum. He laughed once, hollow. All he had done was speak. All he had done was resist being erased. And now, he was being frozen out. Officially. He forwarded the email to Maya. She didn't respond with words. Just a single line of text. "We go public. Everything. Now." As Jaylen stood to pack his things, his phone lit up again, this time with a voicemail from an unknown number. He hit play. It was bearing, calm, chilling. "You should have taken the silence as a gift." Jaylen Carter's suspension wasn't a secret for long. Within hours of the email hitting his inbox, Maya had already leaked it. Strategically, surgically. She posted a redacted version on her private blog and shared it with a small circle of former Wellington students. What she didn't expect was how fast it would spread. By midnight, the post had gone viral again. Only this time, the backlash didn't come from strangers on the internet. It came from Wellington's own. The first signature came from an alumnus named Reggie Foster, class of '88. A software engineer, one of the only black students to graduate from Wellington's mathematics program that decade. He didn't just sign. He wrote an open letter. "Jaylen Carter is not the first of us to be targeted, undermined, or discarded. He's just the first to be heard. What Wellington did to him is not a glitch, it's a design. And unless it's dismantled, more brilliance will be buried." Within hours, signatures began flooding in. By the end of the first day, over 1,200 black and brown alumni had signed the letter. Doctors, teachers, engineers, civil rights lawyers, architects, data scientists, people who had once walked the same marbled halls, sat in the same lecture rooms, and been told, in a dozen subtle ways, "You don't belong here." Each name on the list wasn't just a protest. It was a memory of survival. The letter made 3 demands. Immediate resignation of Professor Wallace Baring. A formal apology to Jaylen Carter in public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Creation of an independent oversight body to review academic bias in STEM programs. No vague promises, no listening sessions, just action. And for the first time, the university couldn't hide behind silence. Because this wasn't just a PR fire. It was a reckoning. 2 days later, word leaked that a major anonymous donor, rumored to be a prominent black tech CEO, had threatened to withdraw a $10 million endowment if no immediate steps were taken. Jaylen read the headline 3 times. Stunned. 10 million. Because of him. Because he refused to be erased. Then came the endorsement from the National Association of Black Mathematicians, a body rarely moved by single cases. Their statement read, "Jaylen Carter's treatment is not an anomaly. It is a reflection of systemic rot in academia. His mathematical reasoning was valid, his presentation professional, and his punishment political. We stand with him, unequivocal."
The association tagged the university, Baring's department, and the Ivy League Dean's Council.
No one responded, but the silence was now radioactive. Meanwhile, Maya worked the legal angle. With mounting public support, she filed for a preliminary injunction on Jaylen's suspension, arguing that it was a retaliatory move meant to silence speech, not enforce policy. The university's lawyers responded in the only way they knew how. Bureaucracy. They refused to drop the suspension but offered a concession: a closed-door reinstatement hearing. No press, no audience, no transparency. Just Jaylen, a table, and the people who tried to erase him. Jaylen stared at the hearing notice pinned to his dorm wall. The date Tuesday 9 a.m. The location, Administrative Review Hall, Room Maya sat across from him, arms crossed. "You don't have to go," she said. "We can fight this from outside. Force them into a public apology. Drag the hearing into court." Jaylen shook his head. "No. I want to sit in the room. I want them to see me. I want them to say it to my face." Maya didn't argue, but her jaw tightened. "Then we prepare," she said. And they did. For the next 2 days, Jaylen gathered every document, message and scrap of evidence, emails, class notes, versions of his proof, the academic memo, the leaked audio, even the voicemail from Baring. Everything. They built a file the size of a law textbook. But Jaylen also prepared something else, something Maya hadn't seen. A personal statement. Not legal, not polished, just truth. On the eve of the hearing, Jaylen took a walk across the Wellington campus. It was late. Fog curled around the lampposts. Statues of old founders stared down with chiseled indifference. He passed the library, the place where he'd first tried to solve the impossible equation. He passed room 207, where he'd stood alone in front of a chalkboard and dared to be excellent. He passed Freeman, the janitor, mopping near the math building entrance. Freeman looked up, nodded. "They scared?" Jaylen gave a quiet smile. "They should be." Freeman grinned. "Then you're doing it right." At 7:02 a.m., Jaylen opened his email to a new message. Subject: You urgent. Rehearing location change. The body read: "Due to ongoing safety concerns, your reinstatement hearing has been moved to an off-campus location. Details will follow via text. And under that, do not speak to anyone before arrival. Come alone." Jaylen Carter paused outside the nondescript brick building, heart hammering like a silent alarm. The mid-morning chill pressed in as he approached, each breath a reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just a campus hearing. It felt more like a public trial by proxy, and for a system that had labeled him a problem, the message was clear: come alone, sit, and prove your existence. He'd kept Maya in the dark. She'd pressed to go with him, to support him in person. But Jaylen shook his head, more out of fear than composure. He needed to face this on his terms, one seat across from them, truth in his hands. The security guard nodded, impassive, as he stepped into a narrow hallway, doors lined either side, humming with fluorescent hums that echoed off cold cement. Somewhere, a file rattled, a water cooler dripped. The quiet was suffocating. Room 2. Jaylen inhaled and pushed through the door. Inside, the room felt like a tribunal chamber disguised as an office. A long wooden table glinted under fluorescent lights. 5 chairs on one side sat behind gray folders and stacked documents. On the opposite end, one chair waited, empty. He took it, every inch of the room waiting to swallow him whole. Soon, Dean Carver entered, followed by 2 unrelated faculty members, shells of formality, and a title-like officer whose eyes bored into him. The last arrival was the student representative, young, unsure, and visibly anxious. Then, without drama, Professor Wallace Baring stepped in, composed, suffocatingly calm. Their eyes met briefly. The panel settled. Carver cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, you are here for a reinstatement hearing. Let me be clear, this is not an adversarial proceeding. That said, the university must address concerns regarding academic conduct and community standards." Jaylen didn't flinch. Carver continued. "Professor Baring has submitted a report indicating that your actions disrupted classroom decorum and violated faculty conduct policies. You may respond." Jaylen placed one hand on the table, reaching into his bag with the other. He retrieved a small speaker, connected it swiftly, and pressed play. The room filled with voices. "I gave him the problem to put him in his place." Baring's voice echoed in the silence. The panelists stiffened. Jaylen let the recording play through. Faculty whispers followed, clauses revealing systemic contempt about non-traditional students, defended standards and strategies cloaked in academic necessity. When it ended, Jaylen leaned forward, voice steady despite the tremor inside. That wasn't disruption. It was truth. You think you uphold rigor, but you weaponize it. Carver folded his hands. That recording was obtained without consent. We cannot judge proceedings on illicitly obtained materials alone. Neither were your comments conveyed with consent, Jaylen replied. Does that make them less dangerous? Silence stretched. Maya stepped in, pressing printed copies of the internal memo across the table. Students to monitor for academic irregularities. Jaylen didn't need to speak. It said what needed saying. Carver scanned the pages, breathing deep. The student rep stood, voice soft, trembling. I don't understand. Why this list? Why target these students for their attitude? Why didn't we speak up? She broke down. We all felt it. We saw students leave, quietly. Change majors. No one looked at us. You told us to stay silent. Jaylen watched the panel shift uneasily. Baring spoke finally. None of this confirms intent or wrongdoing. I challenged a student. That's what faculty do. Maya answered, calm but fierce. We challenge systems too, especially when they're designed to erase us. The title-eyed officer and another faculty member exchanged tight glances. Carver paused. He addressed the room. We'll recess for 24 hours for deliberation. Jaylen stood, gathering his bag. No words. But outside, relief and tension warred inside him, like quiet applause and static. As he exited, his phone buzzed. Check the math lounge bulletin board. He didn't know what to expect until he walked in. The math lounge transformed. Not the empty whiteboards or club flyers. This was truth, on display. Sticky notes covered the board. Names, forgotten narratives. Pain and pen. Left pre-med after calculus 2. 3.8. Transferred in secret. Couldn't take Baring's curve. Each note a life derailed in quiet desperation. In the center, on a bold post-it circled in red. This is the real attrition rate. Jaylen's breath caught. Every note was a name erased. A voice muted. He closed his eyes. They weren't alone anymore. As Jaylen reached out to peel the central note from the board, a professor's voice came from behind him. Be careful what you uncover. Some truths are paid for in silence. Jaylen froze, adrenaline sharp as glass. The quiet roar of the board behind him pulsed in the air. And the silence that followed was charged. Dangerous, necessary, unavoidable. Jaylen Carter pushed open the heavy glass doors of the math lounge, expecting the familiar hum of fluorescent lights, scattered students, and idle chatter. Instead, he was met with stillness, an eerie quiet that wrapped around him as protectively as it did unnervingly. Every desk, wall panel, and bulletin board was covered in a densely stacked tapestry of sticky notes, yellow, green, pink, orange, like a living mosaic of voices once silenced. He took an involuntary step backward, heart thundering. Each note bore a name, a brief message. Some were inked in shaky handwriting, others in crisp, bold strokes. Each told a story that had gone unspoken. Left during sophomore year, never recovered, transferred out after calculus I. I coasted on B- ambition so I wouldn't stand out. Jaylen's throat tightened as he recognized a handful of names, classmates he once studied alongside, competition teammates, faces from group projects, invisible students who hadn't belonged, and then were gone. In the center was a note larger than the rest, in bold red ink. This is the real attrition rate. Beside it, another note, this time in green marker. Smart is not a skin color. Jaylen's eyes stung. The room felt saturated with those messages, as though the building itself was breathing with their weight. He crossed the room slowly, each step heavy. The whispers weren't voices, they were names, messages, stories of defeat and erasure. Sticky notes fluttered when he brushed past, tiny tremors of recognition. Behind him, a soft ping echoed from an open laptop screen. He turned and saw dozens of new posts flood the student forum in real time. Anonymous stories cascading like tears. I changed my major after my advisor suggested another black student would fit better in humanities. They told me to work harder. They didn't offer help. I couldn't breathe in problem sets that made my existence feel like an extra credit penalty. A thread titled Wall of Names, not invisible, already had hundreds of responses in minutes. On the screen, students from every department, STEM and beyond, united in digital solidarity. Each post was a lifeline, a signal fire. Jaylen stared, eyes wide. This was bigger than him. It was them. It was all of them. Outside, the quad surged with life. Word had spread. Students, faculty, alumni, and local community members stood in silent protest. Hundreds, maybe more. Each clutching a math book, quote overlaid t-shirts, reading "Smart is not a skin color," and posters bearing sticky note quotes from the lounge wall. Quiet. Powerful. Unignorable. Everyone knew, standing still in silence, was loudest of all. The campus quad was framed by tall elm trees, whose rustling leaves formed an applause. Film crews from local news stations angled for shots. Drones hovered. The silence stretched, not tense, but resolute. Among the crowd, Jaylen spotted Maya at the edge, arms wrapped around herself. Proud and anxious, she caught his eye, then nodded, a bond deeper than words between them. News outlets captured tight shots of student placards. Erased Neil forgotten. Equations don't judge. Invisible students cannot learn in silence. Some posters included symbolic math notation. Integrals shaped like open hands, curves shaped like smiles, variables framed as human faces. A large banner at the front read, "We are the sum of our global history." The murmurs that started rippling through the crowd were not chance. They were shared breaths, recognition by presence rather than volume. On social media, the sight of that silent march exploded. Celebrities, influencers, and academics reshared the photos with captions, "Solidarity with Jaylen deserves better," and the students who stood where brilliance was expected, not erased. Smart is not a skin color, and the right to education isn't conditional. Salute to the silent protests. One famous black mathematician posted a video with a sketchpad. To see students stand on this quad, holding math books as shields of intellect. This is the kind of resistance we need. By evening, the dominant hashtags were wall of names, smart is not a skin color, equations of justice, trending regionally, then nationally. Back in the quiet hours of the night, Jaylen stood alone under a lamppost in the quad, math book in hand and heart full. The protest had ended, but its echo lingered in ripples of shared courage. He pondered the notes he'd seen, the stories trapped in small squares of paper, names made visible. The aisle of silent witnesses turned living testimony. Maya found him then, wrapped in a jacket, cheeks still wet from the cold, or perhaps from something deeper. "You saw it," she said softly, voice stopped somewhere between wonder and heartbreak. Jaylen nodded, closing his book against his chest. "They told us to disappear," he replied, "so we stayed, all of us." Maya placed her hand on his shoulder. "And now you all stand out." Jaylen closed his eyes. The next morning, Jaylen walked into Calculus 3, anticipation heavy in each step.
Professor Baring's desk was empty. No chalkboard erasures. No cold glances.
But another figure stood at the front, lean, familiar. It was Mr. Freeman, the janitor, and in his hand, a stack of sticky notes. They read, "We see you. We remember. Keep going." He held them up quietly as the classroom fell into a hush that spoke louder than applause. Jaylen stepped into the familiar Calculus 3 lecture hall, shoulders squared and heart steady. The silent protest had shifted something on campus. It wasn't just ripples anymore. It was a tide. He carried that silent weight with him as he walked to his usual seat, just behind the center aisle. Phones were out, cameras hidden but present, and the room hummed with quiet anticipation. The chalkboard stood blank, but on the podium sat a warm touch that caught Jaylen's eye immediately. A stack of fresh chalk and a collapsible stool, placed exactly where Professor Baring would have sat. Only Baring wasn't there. In place of the professor, another figure stood at the front, a face Jaylen never expected to see in a classroom, much less at Calculus 3. It was Mr. Freeman, the janitor. But today he wasn't pushing a mop. Instead, he stood tall behind the podium, in a dark gray sweater and slacks, quietly gathering the students' attention. Jaylen's breath stilled. Freeman cleared his throat, his voice resonating with unexpected calm confidence. "Today's class will be different," he began. The room fell silent. "I'm not here to teach you how to calculate limits, or differentiate strange curves. I'm here to show you something else. Something that speaks to the heart of mathematics, and the heart of us all." Jaylen exchanged glances with Min, who sat a few rows ahead. Her eyes were wide, not with fear but recognition. Freeman held up a piece of chalk. He traced a single smooth arc across the board. Not a formula but a curve. A Mobius-like shape, made of two intersecting loops. Then he paused, looking each student in the eye. "This is a new equation," he said softly. "Not new in the sense of numbers, but new in meaning. It represents resilience, continuity, and belonging. One side, twisted, yet never broken. The challenge is to see yourself in the math." He turned toward the chalkboard, tracing the curve thoughtfully. "I spent years sweeping floors here, watching brilliant minds walk in and fade out. But math, it doesn't eradicate, it endures. That curve is all of us, folded, tangled, ambitious, unique, but connected." A flicker of murmurs swept the room, whispers of awe, confusion, hope. Jaylen felt a lump crawl into his throat. Then Freeman spoke the unexpected twist. "In tribute to Jaylen Carter, and every student whose brilliance they tried to erase, I challenge this class to redefine that curve. Take that same line, and fold it within a new dimension. Make it speak of unity, not fracture." He nodded to Jaylen, inviting him forward. Jaylen approached slowly. The chalk dust smelled comforting. He hesitated, then extended a hand to connect to one intersection of the curve. Then extended another, an abstract gesture. As his fingers traced the line, the chalk began to mimic his motion spontaneously. He realized Freeman had rigged the chalk to respond mid-motion. He continued the curve, guiding it upward with a sudden sweep. It transformed into a spiraled three-dimensional helix, each loop weaving through the original shape. Beautiful, continuous, bound. Gasps echoed around him. Freeman stepped forward again. "Math does not erase you. Math remembers." Jaylen turned, voice steady but quiet. "Why did you do this?" Freeman lowered his gaze. "I taught myself some of this in night classes, nothing official. But I believe knowledge is not given. It's passed forward. And today I pass this to you." A student in the back, a girl who'd remained silent all semester, stood up and applauded. Others joined, slowly at first, then filling the hall with quiet reverence. Bering didn't enter all day. At the end of class, Jaylen gathered his bag and stepped out. Before he left, he took a photo of the chalkboard, freely granting it to the world. Outside, he met Maya. "Did you expect that?" she asked, voice breathless. "No," Jaylen said. "But it's exactly what we needed." The hashtag turned again. New equation. Math remembers. Celebrities shared Jaylen's helix photo. "This is how brilliance survives," said an astrophysicist on Instagram. An artist redrew the curve across a mural on a city wall. A math conference retweeted the sketch, calling it a new symbol for inclusive education. That night, Jaylen lay in his bed, scrolling through posts and messages. There were stories claiming the helix design as a new protest symbol. One student wrote, "That curve reminds me I belong." Then a ping. A direct message from an unidentified number. "You're changing more than equations." He stared. The curve on his screen glowed softly. The next morning, a slideshow appeared on the main lecture hall's projector, not scheduled. It showed photographs of rooms across campus, the lounge wall covered in names, the silent protest on the quad, the helix on the chalkboard, and at the center, a single message, projected bold. "The equation of change has been written." Jaylen entered the hall and realized he was the final variable. The courtyard of Wellington University shimmered with it. Sunlight, polished shoes, and hope. Graduation day, unfolded with a quiet grandeur, caps in the sky, hushed cheers, and the smell of fresh parchment diplomas mingling with spring blossoms. For most, it was a culmination of years of work. For Jaylen Carter, it was a reckoning, a redemption, and a victory with deeper resonance. Jaylen sat towards the middle of the crowd. Gown crisp, cap squared, tassel dangling like the final punctuation of a turbulent sentence. He looked around before the ceremony began, at the mix of joy and relief in the crowd, at professors giving slightly uncomfortable smiles, at alumni taking flashbacks in their eyes. It wasn't a day for triumph. It was a day for belonging. Then he saw him. Mr. Freeman, the janitor who had changed everything, stood just behind the honor guards, hands folded respectfully. Jaylen's eyes found him, and his heart stopped. Freeman had kept his distance this past semester, becoming a silent mentor, more presence than presence itself. Jaylen had asked him once why he'd taught him that new chalk curve, the helix of resilience, rather than do the job he was hired to do. Freeman had answered softly, "I once sat where you sat, just didn't get a cap." Now he stood here, wearing a pressed shirt and tie. Something more, something earned. Jaylen's throat tightened. The ceremony progressed in formal monotones. names called in alphabetical precision. Jaylen was near the end, steps away from crossing, each name preceding his pulse inside him, like preview beats of a drum roll. When it was his turn, the dean, someone Jaylen barely recognized in the open stare of conflict and investigation, called Jaylen Carter. He rose, steady, shoulders back, stepping onto the stage as memories flicked through. The impossible equation, the slur on his door, the hearing room, the board of names, the curve on the board, the helix of belonging. This was not just a border he was crossing. This was a command line in code. Run. He ran. On stage, he shook the dean's hand. He smiled briefly, grateful, but sober. Then he carried his diploma, folded in bureaucratic dignity, as if it were a flamethrower of affirmation. He turned and walked back to his seat, not triumphantly, but firmly, with a nod of solidarity to everyone there, whether they clapped or didn't. After the ceremony, the campus was alive, families hugging, caps tossed, and Jaylen's name buzzed throughout. He drifted through the crowd until he found Freeman. "Thought you were sweeping today," Jaylen said quietly. Freeman chuckled, eyes reflecting something like pride. "I told them I wanted today off." "You earned it." Jaylen blinked. "You came." Freeman nodded, voice low. "I said you never had to carry this alone." Jaylen's chest felt hot. "I wouldn't have done any of it without you." Freeman looked away. "I studied math at Wellington too. I was here for Calculus 3. Same halls. But my family needed me," he said quietly. "So I cleaned floors, working nights so I could go home and go to night school." Jaylen looked at him, new clarity dawning. You were me." Freeman nodded. "But you're me now." That evening, Jaylen delivered his final thesis to the mathematics department. But not in the technical sense. He chose to present a short speech at the student scholarship event. He cleared his throat. "My thesis is called, 'For Those Whose Genius Was Never Recognized.' I dedicate this to students who were dismissed, whose ideas departed with them, whose names never made a wall." He turned and gestured toward Freeman seated in the front row. "This is Mr. Freeman, once a student, often unseen, without whom this curve of resilience would have never been drawn." Applause rose like a wave. Then Jaylen announced a new scholarship, the Jaylen Carter Fellowship for Underrepresented Mathematicians, seeded with donations, some public, many anonymous. It was designed to support students who looked like him, students who were told they didn't belong, students whose calculus of acceptance required infinity. The applause turned to a standing ovation, not for him alone, but for the promise he embodied. The students who stood too saw themselves reflected there like equations solving themselves in real time. Graduation behind him. Jaylen didn't quiet down. Weeks later, he walked into a classroom, not as a student, but as a guest lecturer invited to teach a talk on topology, inclusion, and the new equation of belonging. The room was familiar, rows of desks, a clean chalkboard, faint chalk dust scent. The students quieted as he entered. He wrote one line on the board. "You belong." Then he drew the helix. Laughter and awe rippled. He spoke softly. "I was once asked to solve an impossible problem. But I'd already found the answer. It's not in the numbers, it's in persistence. In refusing erasure, in understanding that every variable has worth, not because of who loves it, but because it exists." Silence. Then hands raised. Black students, brown students, students who carried unfinished math in their bags, not as shame, but as defiance. He guided them through the helix of belonging. There was no clang, no triumphal music. Just Jaylen's voice, the chalk scratch, and the unshakable truth of presence. Because the only problem they couldn't solve was a young black man who refused to fail. No one should have to fight this hard, just to be seen. If you've ever felt dismissed, erased, or told you don't belong, this story was for you. Type yes if you believe brilliance has no color. Subscribe if this story broke your heart and opened your eyes.